The rain lashes against the timbered eaves of a 13th-century manor, a sound as rhythmic as the beating heart of a continent on the cusp of its zenith. We imagine a world perpetually draped in the shroud of the grave, waiting for the Enlightenment to strike a match in the gloom. This was not a world dormant. It was a world accelerating. We remember the 14th century for the Black Death, the sudden, suffocating silence that fell upon the bustling markets of Europe. Before the flea-ridden rats arrived in the Sicilian ports, before the social fabric frayed into the chaos of the late medieval period, there existed a singular, shimmering epoch of expansion. It was a time of unprecedented demographic surge, where the frontiers of agriculture pushed deep into the wild forests and the hum of trade routes stitched the disparate corners of Christendom into a singular, pulsing economic organism. We are not dealing with a monolithic, static dark age, but a dynamic, evolving civilization that was, in many ways, more sophisticated than the centuries that followed its eventual decline. Yet, the evidence suggests a narrative of profound vitality. We see the rise of the first universities, the birth of complex banking systems that bridged the gap between the merchant and the crown, and an architectural ambition that defied the very laws of gravity. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and progress. As the bells of the village church toll, signaling the end of another cycle of harvest, there is a sense of permanence, a belief that the upward trajectory of prosperity is the natural order of the world. But history is rarely a straight line. The foundations of this golden age are not as solid as they appear. We stand at the threshold of a world that thinks it has mastered time itself. The sun hung heavy and golden over a continent in metamorphosis. The medieval warm period took hold, a climatic shift so profound it altered the very geography of survival. Glaciers retreated from the mountain passes, and the biting frost that had long kept the wilderness at bay finally surrendered to an extended, balmy growing season. This was the heartbeat of a new era. Across the rolling plains of France, the heavy, forested clay, once considered wasteland, was carved open by the revolutionary heavy plow. It was a caloric revolution. With bellies finally full, the demographics of Europe surged. Look closely at the landscape. The horizon is no longer defined solely by the gloom of the forest, but by the rising silhouettes of stone cathedrals and the sprawling, frantic sprawl of market towns. As the granaries groaned under the weight of abundance, a new class of merchant princes emerged from the mud, spinning the threads of trade into a vast, interconnected web. Roads that had been overgrown tracks for generations were suddenly choked with carts, vibrant arteries pumping the lifeblood of commerce between the Mediterranean ports and the burgeoning Baltic fairs. The medieval economy, fueled by this unnatural stretch of temperate stability, reached toward a zenith of complexity. Banks blossomed in the shadows of counting houses, and the concept of credit began to lubricate the gears of an international market. They believed they had tamed the seasons, turning the fickle whims of nature into a reliable machine of infinite growth. The Golden Age was a fragile bloom, and the frost was already stirring in the dark. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of raw fleece and cold coin. Across the rolling hills of England and the damp lowlands of Flanders, the wool trade ignited a fever of commerce. Sheep became the silent architects of a new world order. Their fleeces were transformed into high-quality textiles that traveled the treacherous arteries of international trade. In the sun-drenched piazzas of Italy, a different kind of alchemy took hold. Here, the merchant princes of Florence and Venice mastered the art of the intangible. With the birth of modern banking, capital began to flow like water, crossing borders with a stroke of a quill. For the first time, money was no longer a static hoard buried in a vault. It was a living, breathing force, capable of bridging the gap between a Venetian merchant and a Flemish weaver. If the soul of the era was found in the ledger, its heart was carved into the sky. The Gothic cathedrals erupted from the soil like stone forests. Stained glass, a kaleidoscope of captured sunlight, turned the interiors into otherworldly chambers of color and light. These were not merely houses of worship. They were monuments to the new economic reality, financed by the burgeoning guilds that controlled the flow of commerce. Yet, this vertical climb toward the clouds masked a mounting vulnerability. The cities grew dense, huddled beneath the weight of their own success. They had built a civilization of stone and credit, confident that the momentum of their progress would never falter. The ledger was balanced, the vaults were full, and the bells of the great cathedrals rang out, echoing across a continent that had never felt more powerful or more exposed. But the climate, the silent arbiter of human ambition, was changing. By 1315, the sky turned against them. The soil, exhausted by decades of intensive farming to feed an unprecedented population, simply stopped yielding. The Great Famine was not merely a shortage of bread, it was the shattering of an illusion. People who had known only the steady climb of prosperity were suddenly confronted with the raw, hollow ache of starvation. The density of the cities, once a testament to social cohesion, became a death trap. This was the quiet, agonizing prologue to the horror that would arrive in 1347. When the ships finally pulled into Sicilian ports carrying the Yersinia pestis bacteria, they did not land in a kingdom of robust health. The medieval world had outpaced its own ecological capacity, pushing the limits of land and labor until the system was stretched to the breaking point. We look back at this period with a sobering recognition. We, too, build our towers high, relying on intricate, global supply chains that feel permanent until they are tested. We assume that our technological mastery insulates us from the whims of the natural order, much like the medieval merchant assumed his gold was a shield against the turning of the seasons. The catastrophe of the Black Death was not an unpredictable bolt from the blue, it was the final, devastating consequence of a world that had forgotten how to be humble. If this journey through the hidden architecture of the medieval mind has shifted your perspective on how civilizations rise and fall, consider subscribing. Join us as we examine the patterns of the past so we might better understand the precarious balance of our own time.